Okay, we have some people that are having a hard time trying to figure out what's going on with an electrical circuit. This is our power supply. This one's got a 12-volt power supply. It's got 6 ohm resistor, a 4 ohm resistor, and a 2 ohm resistor. Something that I usually draw on there is the whole EIR thing, right? And this is kind of confusing by itself because E is volts, I is amps, and R is resistance. So I'm going to also do this volts, amps, and ohms. Okay, usually I don't put this on there, but I'm going to put it on there so that we have that on there with that. Now, if I have a series circuit, I need to have enough information to solve all of the parts of this series circuit. So I'm going to just go across this one. We're going to start with this one. I'm going to just go through this one using the things that we know, the order that we can go through these to figure out what is what on here, okay? So what do I do first? In this one, I'm just going to add these ohms up because in a series circuit, I just add the ohms together and it gives me the total ohms. The total ohms equals the sum of the individual ohms. So 6 ohms plus 4 ohms plus 2 ohms, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 ohms is 12 ohms. Then if I have 2 of these things, I have volts and ohms. I can divide volts and ohms. If I just cover up that I can divide the volts by the ohms, and then it'll tell me what the amps is in there. Well, this is really super math. It's almost like I thought I was going to do this in the first place. So 12 volts divided by 12 ohms equals 1 amp. What's the next step in this? The next step. Okay. I'm going to take this 1 amp, the same amount of amps that's in one part of a series circuit is the same amount of amps in every part of the series circuit. Okay. So if I have 1 amp here, I have to have a full circuit. I'm going to have 1 amp here, and I'm going to have 1 amp here, and I'm going to have 1 amp here. This gives me an opportunity to do, I have 2 of these things in each one of these spots. This one right here, I have 1 amp times 2 ohms, tells me that I have 2 volts dropped across this load or this resistance, okay? 1 times 4, I got 4 volts dropped across this resistance. And 1 times 6, I have 6 volts dropped across this resistance, okay? So that's really super simple. I always put the volts on top of the line, and I always had the volts on top, because whenever I'm using this circle, the volts are going to be on top. The volts are always going to be on top. These two, they don't really matter. I mean, it doesn't matter which of those is on top. I can just multiply those from anywhere, and I can get that same value. Okay, this one's got a little bit different story. This one isn't telling us the ohms right here. This is telling us the amps. So the series that I go through on this isn't going to be exactly the same. This has got 4 ohms and 8 ohms, but that's not the total amount of ohms, so I can't put that there. But it does have the 2 amps going through there. The amount of amperage going through one part of the series circuit is the same as the amperage going through every part of the series circuit. So I can take that 2 amps, I can put 2 amps, and 2 amps, and 2 amps, just like that. Now, well, except for this one, these ones here I can find out whatever they are. This one here I have 24 divided by 2, gives me 12 ohms. This one's got 8 times 2, because I'm looking for the volts, right? I'm looking for the volts. 8 times 2 is going to be 16 volts. 4 times 2 is going to be 8 volts. But what do I do on this one? All I have is the amps. Well, the amount of voltages and the voltage drops across this circuit are going to equal the total. So if I have 24 volts total, and I have 16 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Holy crap. That's 24 volts right there. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, 23, 24. 24 volts. So this has got 0 volts dropped across it. What does that mean? 0 divided by 2 is, I got 0 ohms here. This is just like it's shorted out. Yeah. Okay. We're moving along. We're moving along. Is that everything? We can work out the watts on these later on. I'm going to work out the watts later on, okay, after I get this last one. This one here, it has some ohms. It has 2 sets of ohms, an amp, and a voltage drop. This doesn't even tell us how many volts the main power supply is. So what do we have on this one here? What do I do first? The amount of amps that I have in one part of this series circuit is going to be the same number of amps that I have on every part of this series circuit, right? Now I have 2 of those right here. 20 times 1. 20 times 1 is going to tell me that I have 20 volts dropped here. 25 times 1, 25 divided by 1 is going to say that I have 25 ohms here. And this one here has 35 ohms times 1 amp. That's going to give me 35 volts of voltage drop, okay? Now, how do I find this stuff over here? I can add up these ohms, okay? 25 plus 35 is what, 60, 70, 80 ohms. And then I can add up these voltage drops. 35 plus 25 plus 20, 35, 45, 55, 60, 70, 80 volts. Or 80 ohms times 1 amp is 80 volts, okay? So all of that was pretty easy. Now, how do I find out the power, the amount of watts on each of these? Watts are equal to the volts times the amps in a purely resistive circuit, okay? So volts times amps are going to equal watts. Volts times amps. Volts, 6 times 1, 6 watts. 4 times 1 is 4 watts. 2 times 1 is 2 watts. If I add all of these wattages together, 6, 10, 11, 12, this equals 12 watts. Is 12 watts the same as 12 volts times 1 amp? You bet it is. Same thing goes for all of these, okay? And that system will work on every one of these. 24 times 2 is 48 watts. 8 times 2 is 16 watts. 16 times 2 is 32 watts. That's a funny looking W. And then 2 times 0 is, 0 watts. Because that's shorted out, right? 16 plus 32, so 6, 7, 8, 48. 48 watts. So these watts added together equals that watts. Let's take a look at this last one. 1 amp times 80 volts, 80 watts. 1 amp times 20 volts is 20 watts. 1 amp times 25 volts is 25 watts. And 1 amp times 35 volts is 35 watts. Easy enough. 35 plus 25 is 60, 70, 80 watts, 80 watts. Perfect. Okay, that was easy enough. Didn't even need a calculator really for that. Kind of messed up on this one, but we worked through it. Okay, easy enough. We can do this.